The night was cold and wet, with rain pouring down like it had no plans to stop. It was one of those nights when even the trees seemed to shiver under the weight of the storm. Charles Bennett stood by the riverbank, his expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the muddy ground. He wore a dark suit that clung to him now, soaked from both rain and sweat. His hands trembled as he held onto the handle of a small wicker basket. Inside the basket were two tiny bundles, each wrapped carefully in soft white blankets. They were his children, his twin babies, Ethan and Lily. Charles looked down at them, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He tried to convince himself this was the right thing to do. "They'll be better off without me," he muttered under his breath, though the words felt hollow. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly lighting up the area around him. For a moment he could see their faces, their innocent little faces. Their eyes were closed and they slept peacefully, completely unaware of what was about to happen. He couldn't help but think back to how things had gotten so bad. 18 months ago, life had been perfect, or so he thought. He'd been married to Claire, the love of his life. She was smart, kind, and beautiful, everything he wasn't. Together, they'd built a life full of luxury and happiness. But then she got pregnant. At first, Charles was thrilled. The idea of having a family made him feel whole in ways money never could. But as the months went by, fear crept in. What if he messed up? What if he wasn't good enough to be a father? And then came the day of the twins' birth, a day that should have been the happiest of his life, but instead turned into a nightmare. Claire didn't survive the delivery. She left him alone with two screaming infants who needed more than he could ever give. At first, Charles tried. He hired nannies, bought all the best baby gear, and did everything society told him a good parent should do. But it wasn't enough. Every time he looked at the twins, he saw Claire. Every cry reminded him of her absence. The pain became too much to bear. Slowly, he began to withdraw, spending less time at home and more time drowning his sorrows in work and parties. Eventually, he convinced himself that keeping the twins would only make things worse, for them and for him. He told himself someone else would take care of them, someone better, someone who deserved them. That's why he was here now, standing on the edge of the river. The basket in his hands felt impossibly heavy, not because of its size or contents, but because of the weight of what he was about to do. He glanced over his shoulder at the sleek black car parked a few feet away. Its headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the ground. If anyone saw him, he'd be ruined, not just financially, but emotionally. People would call him a monster, a coward, and maybe they'd be right. But nobody was watching. The storm had driven everyone indoors, leaving the riverbank deserted. Only the sound of rain hitting the water broke the silence. Charles took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. He stepped closer to the river, lowering the basket until it hovered just above the surface. The current was gentle tonight, barely strong enough to carry the basket far. Still, it would be enough to take them away from him, enough to give them a chance at a better life. As he released the basket, a sob escaped his lips. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the raindrops. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." He watched as the basket drifted slowly downstream, carried by the calm flow of the water. The twins stirred slightly but didn't wake. They remained oblivious to the fact that their father had abandoned them. To them, this was just another quiet moment in their short lives. Charles stayed rooted to the spot, watching until the basket disappeared into the distance. Only then did he turn and walk back to his car. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was punishing him for what he'd done. When he reached the driver's side door, he hesitated before getting in. Leaning against the car, he let out a shaky breath and stared up at the sky. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the turmoil inside him. For a brief moment, he considered running after the basket. Maybe he could still catch it. Maybe he could undo what he'd done. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. There was no going back now. He slid into the car, slamming the door shut behind him. As he started the engine, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His eyes were red and swollen, his face pale. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. Who was this person? How had he become someone capable of abandoning his own flesh and blood? The drive back to the city was a blur. Charles drove aimlessly, his mind consumed by guilt and regret. By the time he pulled into the underground parking garage of his penthouse apartment, he felt numb. He stepped out of the car, leaving behind puddles of water on the concrete floor. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, each ding of the passing floors dragging him further into despair. When he finally entered his apartment, he collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. He couldn't tell. Time lost all meaning in the haze of his thoughts. Outside, the storm began to subside, replaced by an eerie calm. Somewhere far away, miles down the river, the basket carrying Ethan and Lily floated steadily onward. Unbeknownst to Charles, fate had other plans for his children. Just as the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, a couple taking an early morning walk along the river spotted the basket. Margaret and Henry Carter had no idea whose babies they were rescuing, but they knew one thing for certain. They were meant to find them. And so, while Charles sat alone in his penthouse drowning in self-loathing, a new chapter was beginning for Ethan and Lily. A chapter filled with love, hope, and second chances. Little did Charles know, his actions that night would set off a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Ethan and Lily grew up in a small house surrounded by fields of green in rural Pennsylvania. Their home wasn't fancy or big, but it was full of warmth and laughter. Margaret and Henry Carter had taken them in when they were just babies, and, though they never told the twins much about where they came from, they gave them everything they needed: love, care, and guidance. Margaret was a schoolteacher who spent her days teaching kids how to read and write. She loved bringing stories to life, and she passed that love on to Lily. From a young age, Lily had been fascinated by words. She would spend hours scribbling in notebooks, creating tales about brave heroes in magical worlds. Her imagination seemed endless, and Margaret encouraged her every step of the way. "You have a gift," Margaret often said, smiling proudly as she watched Lily pour her heart into her stories. Henry, on the other hand, worked at a little bicycle repair shop in town. He was a quiet man with calloused hands and a gentle soul. Ethan admired him more than anyone else. From the time he could walk, Ethan had been curious about how things worked. He'd take apart old toys and gadgets, trying to figure out what made them tick. Henry noticed this early on and started teaching him everything he knew. Together they fixed bikes, built model airplanes, and even tried their hand at inventing new contraptions. Ethan's mind was always buzzing with ideas, and Henry was there to help bring them to life. Despite their different interests, Ethan and Lily were inseparable. They shared a bond that went deeper than being siblings. They felt like two halves of the same whole. When one struggled, the other was always there to lift them up. Whether it was helping Ethan solve a tricky engineering problem or listening to Lily read aloud from her latest story, they supported each other through thick and thin. But as close as they were to Margaret and Henry, there were moments when both twins felt a strange emptiness inside. It wasn't something they talked about often, but sometimes, late at night, they'd lie awake wondering about their past. Where did they really come from? Who were their birth parents? Why had they ended up with the Carters? These questions lingered in the back of their minds, especially during quiet times. Once, when Ethan was 10, he found an old photo album in the attic. Most of the pictures were of Margaret and Henry, but tucked away in the corner was a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local man involved in infant disappearance case." Below it was a blurry picture of a man in a suit standing near a riverbank. Ethan didn't think much of it at the time, he was too young to understand, but the image stayed with him. Years later, when Lily stumbled upon the same clipping while looking for Christmas decorations, she felt a chill run down her spine. This time, she showed it to Ethan. "Do you think this has anything to do with us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan frowned, studying the article carefully. It says here that someone abandoned twin babies in the river 18 years ago. That's us. Lily's eyes widened. You don't think... I don't know, Ethan interrupted, shaking his head. But we should ask Mom and Dad about it. The next day after dinner, they sat Margaret and Henry down in the living room. The air felt heavy as Ethan placed the clipping on the coffee table. We found this, he began, his tone serious. Does it have anything to do with us? Margaret and Henry exchanged a glance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret sighed, reaching out to hold both of their hands. We were hoping you'd never have to know, she admitted softly. Yes, sweethearts, that article is about you. We found you floating in a basket near the river when you were just babies. We didn't know who left you there, and we decided to raise you as our own. The room fell silent. Ethan and Lily stared at their parents, processing the news. It was a lot to take in. All these years they'd thought they were just lucky to have such wonderful adoptive parents. Now they realized their lives had started with a mystery they suddenly wanted answers to. We need to find out who did this, Lily said firmly, breaking the silence. Who left us there? Henry nodded slowly. If that's what you want, we'll support you. But be careful, okay? Sometimes the truth isn't easy to hear. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into researching their past. Using public records and online databases, he pieced together bits of information. It wasn't easy. Most of the details were buried or incomplete, but eventually he stumbled upon a name: Charles Bennett. The name appeared in connection with a high-profile scandal involving missing infants. Ethan dug deeper and discovered that Charles was a wealthy businessman from New York City. This has to be him, Ethan told Lily one evening, showing her the documents he'd gathered. He fits the timeline and he matches the description in the article. Lily bit her lip, feeling a mix of anger and curiosity. What do we do now? We confront him, Ethan replied without hesitation. He owes us an explanation. Though they were nervous, the twins agreed it was time to face the man who might be their father. With Margaret and Henry's blessing, they prepared to reach out to Charles. They didn't expect forgiveness, they just wanted answers. Little did they know, their decision would set off a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. They planned their next move. Ethan and Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But they also knew they weren't alone. No matter what happened, they had each other, and the unwavering love of the people who had raised them. It took Ethan and Lily several weeks to gather the courage to contact Charles Bennett. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they couldn't keep running away from the truth. One evening, after much deliberation, Lily picked up her phone and dialed the number they had found online, a private line linked to Charles's office. Her heart raced as the call connected, and she heard the sound of ringing on the other end. Hello? A deep voice answered. Lily swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. Is this Charles Bennett? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. There was a pause before the man replied. Yes, this is Charles. Who's calling? My name is Lily, she said, glancing at Ethan for support. And my brother Ethan is here with me. We think you might know something about our past. Another long silence followed. For a moment, Lily wondered if he'd hung up. But then she heard him exhale, sharply. What are you talking about? He asked, his tone guarded. We were abandoned as babies, Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. We were found in a basket near a river 18 years ago. Does that sound familiar to you? Charles didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. How did you get this number? That doesn't matter, Ethan cut in, taking the phone from Lily. We just want answers. Are you our father? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. On the other end of the line, Charles felt his world tilt. He hadn't thought about that terrible night in years, burying the memory deep beneath layers of wealth and distractions, and now out of nowhere 2 strangers were dragging it all back into the light. I don't know what you're talking about, Charles stammered, though his voice betrayed him. This must be some kind of prank. It's not a prank, Ethan snapped, his frustration boiling over. We have proof. Newspaper articles, records, everything. If you don't want to talk to us, fine. But we'll find out the truth one way or another. For a moment, Charles considered hanging up. He could ignore them, pretend this was just a random call from someone trying to scam him. But something in Ethan's tone struck a chord. It reminded him of himself. Determined, relentless, unwilling to give up. Slowly, reluctantly, he sighed. All right, he said quietly. Let's meet, face to face. 2 days later, Ethan and Lily stood outside a towering skyscraper in the heart of New York City. The building gleamed under the midday sun, its glass facade reflecting the hustle and bustle of the streets below. As they stepped inside the opulent lobby, they couldn't help but feel out of place. Their simple clothes and worn backpacks seemed out of sync with the polished surroundings. They were escorted to the top floor where Charles's penthouse office overlooked the city. When they entered, Charles was standing by the window staring out at the skyline. He turned to face them, and for the first time, Ethan and Lily saw the man who might be their father. He looked older than they expected, his face lined with stress and regret. His eyes darted between them, searching for traces of familiarity. So, Charles began, clearing his throat. You're Ethan and Lily? Yes, Ethan replied curtly, crossing his arms. And you're Charles Bennett, our father. Charles flinched at the word father. I don't know if I deserve that title, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But yes, I am your biological father. The room fell silent. Lily and Ethan exchanged a glance, unsure of what to say next. Finally, Lily spoke. Why did you leave us? Why did you abandon us like that? Charles sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I was scared, he confessed. Your mother, Claire, she passed away giving birth to you. I wasn't ready to be a parent. I didn't think I could handle it. So I made the worst mistake of my life. You mean you dumped us in a river? Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp with anger. Do you have any idea how close we came to dying? What if no one had found us? What then? I know, Charles said, tears welling up in his eyes. Believe me, I know. Every day since that night I've lived with the guilt. I tried to forget to bury it, but it never went away. Seeing you two now, it brings it all back. Lily felt a pang of sympathy despite herself. She could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of years of regret. But sympathy wasn't enough to erase the anger she felt. You gave up your chance to be part of our lives, she said firmly. You chose money and comfort over us. I know, Charles repeated, his voice breaking, and I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I could take it back. But I can't. All I can do now is try to make things right. Ethan scoffed. How? How are you going to fix this? You can't just buy us off with your fancy cars and apartments. I'm not trying to buy you off, Charles insisted. I want to understand you, to know who you are. Maybe we can start over, not as father and children, but as people learning about each other. Lily hesitated. She wanted to trust him, but it was hard. Too many questions swirled in her mind. Why should we believe you? She asked. After everything you've done, why should we give you another chance? Charles didn't have an answer. He sat there, defeated, knowing he couldn't force them to forgive him. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said finally. But I hope someday you'll at least understand why I did what I did. And maybe we can build something new. The meeting ended without resolution. Ethan and Lily left the penthouse feeling conflicted. Part of them wanted to walk away and never look back. But another part, the part that had always yearned for answers, knew this was only the beginning. Whether they liked it or not, Charles was tied to their past, and untangling those threads would take time. As they stepped back onto the busy streets of New York, Ethan glanced at Lily. What do you think? He asked. I don't know, she admitted. He seems sorry, but sorry isn't enough. We'll see what happens next. Unbeknownst to them, Charles watched them leave from his window, his heart heavy with regret. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, uncertain hope that maybe, just maybe, he could redeem himself. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. Redemption rarely was. After their first meeting with Charles, Ethan and Lily weren't sure what to do next. They had expected anger, frustration, or even closure, but instead they found themselves facing a man who seemed genuinely broken. It was unsettling. For years they had imagined their birth father as someone cold and heartless, someone who didn't care about them. But the Charles they met was different. He was vulnerable, regretful, and desperate to make amends. Still, forgiveness wasn't easy. Back home in Pennsylvania, the twins spent hours talking about their feelings with Margaret and Henry. "He says he wants to start over," Lily explained one evening, sitting at the kitchen table. "But how can we trust him? What if this is just another lie?" Margaret placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I understand why you're hesitant, sweetheart. Trust takes time, especially after something like this. But I think it's worth giving him a chance, if that's what you want." Henry nodded in agreement. "You don't have to decide right away. Take your time, see where things go. If he truly wants to change, his actions will show it." Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not just about him, though. It's about us. We've spent our whole lives wondering who we are and where we came from. Now that we know, I don't know how to feel." "That's okay," Margaret said gently. "You're allowed to feel however you need to. There's no right or wrong way to process this." Encouraged by their adoptive parents' wisdom, Ethan and Lily decided to keep meeting with Charles, not because they trusted him completely, but because they wanted answers. Over the next few weeks, they visited him several times in New York City. Each meeting was awkward at first, but slowly they began to open up. During one visit, Charles invited them to dinner at a quiet restaurant. As they sat together, he asked questions about their lives, what they liked to do, what dreams they had for the future. Ethan talked about his passion for engineering and his plans to build innovative machines that could help people. Lily shared her love for writing and her dream of publishing a novel someday. Charles listened intently, his eyes lighting up with pride. "You're both so talented," he said sincerely. "I wish I could have been there to see you grow up." "We had, Margaret and Henry," Lily replied, her tone softening slightly. "They gave us everything we needed." "I'm glad," Charles admitted. "They sound like amazing people. I owe them more than I can ever repay." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for the first time, Ethan and Lily saw glimpses of the man Charles might have been before his mistakes. He told funny stories about his childhood and shared memories of Claire, their mother. Hearing about her made them ache inside, but it also helped them piece together more of their identity. Despite these moments of connection, doubt lingered. One day, after returning from another meeting with Charles, Ethan voiced his concerns to Lily. "Do you think he's really changed?" he asked. "Or is he just saying what we want to hear?" Lily hesitated. "I don't know. Sometimes I think he means it, but other times, I wonder if he's just trying to ease his guilt." "Me too," Ethan admitted. "But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe all that matters is how we feel about him, whether we can move forward or if we even want to." Their uncertainty led them to a decision. They would invite Charles to visit their hometown. They wanted him to meet Margaret and Henry, the people who had raised them with love and care. It was a big step, one that required courage from all sides. When the day arrived, Charles drove to Pennsylvania, nervous but hopeful. As he pulled into the driveway of the Carters' modest home, he felt a lump in his throat. This was the place where his children had grown up, the life he had denied them. Stepping out of the car, he took a deep breath and walked to the front door. Margaret greeted him warmly, though her eyes held a hint of caution. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking his hand. "We've heard a lot about you." "All good things, I hope?" Charles joked weakly, though his smile faltered under her steady gaze. Inside, the living room was cozy and inviting. Family photos lined the walls, capturing moments of joy and laughter. Ethan and Lily introduced Charles to Henry, who shook his hand firmly. "You've got a lot to answer for," Henry said bluntly, "but we're willing to listen." The afternoon unfolded with a mix of tension and warmth. Charles apologized repeatedly, expressing his gratitude to Margaret and Henry for raising Ethan and Lily. "I don't deserve their forgiveness," he admitted, "but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it." Margaret and Henry exchanged a glance. They could see the sincerity in his words, but they also understood the pain he had caused. "Forgiveness isn't ours to give," Margaret told him gently. "It's up to them." As the day went on, Charles began to relax. He learned more about the life Ethan and Lily had built, their hobbies, their dreams, their struggles. In turn, they learned about him, his fears, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. By the end of the visit, the atmosphere had shifted. While there was still distance between them, there was also a glimmer of understanding. On the drive back to New York, Charles reflected on the day. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. He couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future, for himself, for Ethan and Lily, and for the family they might one day become. Back home, Ethan and Lily talked late into the night. "Do you think he's serious?" Lily asked. "I think he's trying," Ethan replied. "And maybe that's enough for now." Months passed since Charles had first met Ethan and Lily. Slowly but surely, their relationship began to change. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, frustration, and doubt. But both sides were making an effort. Charles visited Pennsylvania regularly, spending time with Ethan, Lily, and the Carters. He listened when they talked about their lives, asked questions about their passions, and even helped Ethan with some of his engineering projects. For her part, Lily shared drafts of her writing with him, surprising herself by seeking his feedback, too. First, Ethan and Lily kept their distance emotionally, unsure if they could truly trust Charles. But over time, they noticed small things that made a big difference. Charles always remembered details from their conversations, like Ethan's favorite tool or Lily's dream of publishing a novel. He sent thoughtful gifts, not expensive ones, but meaningful ones like a book on robotics for Ethan and a leather-bound journal for Lily. These gestures showed them that he was paying attention, that he cared. One day, Charles surprised them with an idea. "I'd like to fund your dreams," he said during one of his visits. "Ethan, I can invest in your inventions. And Lily, I'll help you publish your novel. Whatever you need, consider it done." Ethan raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Why? Are you doing this? Is it because you feel guilty?" Charles hesitated before answering. "Yes, partly, but also because I'm proud of you. You've accomplished so much without me, and I want to support you now. Not as repayment for the past, but as a way to be part of your future." Lily exchanged a glance with Ethan. She could see the sincerity in Charles's eyes, and for the first time she felt a spark of hope. Maybe redemption was possible, not just for Charles, but for all of them. With Margaret and Henry's blessing, Ethan accepted Charles's offer to fund his startup. Together, they worked on prototypes for innovative machines designed to improve everyday life. Meanwhile, Lily collaborated with Charles to edit and refine her manuscript. When the book was finally published, it became a local bestseller, earning praise from readers and critics alike. As the months went by, Charles grew closer not only to Ethan and Lily, but also to Margaret and Henry. He realized how much they had sacrificed to raise his children and how much love they had poured into their lives. To show his gratitude, he bought them a new house, a modest yet comfortable home near the countryside, and ensured they would never have to worry about finances again. Though Margaret and Henry initially resisted, they eventually accepted his generosity, seeing it as a gesture of goodwill rather than charity. Despite these positive changes, Ethan and Lily still struggled with their feelings toward Charles. Forgiveness didn't come overnight, and there were days when old wounds reopened. but they learned to focus on the present instead of dwelling on the past. They saw how hard Charles was working to make amends and decided to meet him halfway. 1. Evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Charles invited everyone to return to the river where it all began. "I think it's time to let go of the past," he said. "Not forget it, but find peace with it." The group gathered by the water's edge, the same spot where Charles had abandoned the twins 18 years earlier. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers. Charles held a small lantern in his hands, its flame flickering softly in the twilight. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't undo what I did, but I can promise to be better, to be the father you deserve, even if it's late. I hope someday you'll forgive me." Ethan and Lily looked at each other, then back at Charles. Without a word, they stepped forward and placed their hands on the lantern alongside him. Together, they released it onto the water, watching as it drifted slowly downstream. The tiny flame danced on the surface, symbolizing closure and renewal. Margaret and Henry stood nearby, smiling through tears. They knew this moment marked the beginning of something new, not just for Charles, Ethan, and Lily, but for all of them. The journey ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but they faced it together, united by love and understanding. As the lantern disappeared into the distance, Charles turned to his children. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me another chance." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "We're not saying everything's perfect, but we're willing to try," Lily added. "And maybe that's enough for now." In that moment, standing by the river under the fading light of the sun, they found a fragile yet undeniable peace. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much further they could go together. Charles returned to New York City with a renewed sense of purpose. He continued to support Ethan and Lily, cheering them on as they pursued their dreams. In turn, they began to include him in their lives, inviting him to family gatherings and milestones. Though their bond was still healing, it grew stronger. With each passing day, Margaret and Henry watched with pride as the fractured pieces of their family came together. They had always believed in second chances, and now they saw firsthand how forgiveness and love could transform even the darkest moments into something beautiful. Years later, when Ethan's invention revolutionized sustainable energy and Lily's novels touched hearts around the world, they often thought back to that night by the river. It was the night they chose to move forward, not forgetting the past but embracing the future with open hearts. And as for Charles, he finally found the redemption he had longed for. He may have been late to the role of fatherhood, but he gave. It is all proving that it's never too late to change, to grow, and to love.